Well, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining and attending this presentation. Thanks to Kim and IPMI for hosting. We enjoyed the Q1 summit very much. I think we did another presentation at that. And I'm excited to talk about the future of the curb today. And if you have any questions or thoughts throughout the presentation, go ahead and put them in the chat or just save them till the end. We'll start the Q&A portion by going through the backlog, and then we can have just an open discussion from there and field new questions. But with that, let's get started. I definitely see some names in there that I recognize. Nice to see you guys. For everyone I haven't met, my name is Matty Schaefer. I'm the CEO and one of the 3 co-founders of VADE. We use custom solar cellular cameras with computer vision to help cities monitor and manage the curb. It's really all based around real-time data. We actually started working on VADE almost 4 years ago now, which is crazy to think. It was when we were, I think, juniors in college. And it took us a whole year to figure out that we should be using cameras and not sensors. And then it took us another year to figure out how to actually make cameras. And then a 3rd year with a pandemic to start looking at loading zones as like a thing to use the cameras on. So there were a lot of ups and downs, but we learned a lot on the journey. And one of the more important things that we learned is that technology, especially in a market like this, is a tool. It's not a solution in itself. And like any other tool, it's only as useful as it is usable. And as I go through this presentation, keep in mind that everything I mentioned, every technology piece that I mentioned, it's all possible and has been possible for years. It just hasn't been practical yet. And I think that that's kind of what we're seeing start to change is the usability and the ease of access really coming down, and these newer technologies are becoming useful and usable in a practical setting. So let's start with the reality of parking today. Parking has seen a lot of innovation in the past decade or so. You got payment apps and mobile LPR vehicles, which still blow my mind, and predictive availability and the digital inventory maps. But despite all that innovation, the system itself hasn't seemed to change a ton, at least from the end user's perspective. Like if you're a citizen driving and then parking in town, you still have to drive to your destination and then find an open spot and make sure you're allowed to park in that open spot. Then you find a kiosk or you use a mobile app and you pay for an amount of time. And then at the end of that time, you either leave, you extend your time, or you risk getting a ticket. And that's stayed true for a while. Another way to look at it is we're starting to reach the peak of the S-curve of kind of the past couple decades of parking, where we're doing as much as we can within the bounds and the constraints of the system as it's set up today. And to make significant progress going forward, we need a step change rather than a linear change in technology and processes that let us grow further into it. And I think a good example of this is how payments work. Back with coin meters, I don't think there are any. I don't think I've ever used like a coin meter. I'll have to verify that. But back when coin meters were the dominant payment methodology, it made sense that you had to pay for a block of time in advance because you had coins. They had to represent an amount of time, and you put them in. But then when we switched and evolved into the pay stations and mobile apps, they improved the process and they made that process a lot easier and a lot better. But they didn't fundamentally change the process. You still pay for time in advance, then you worry about extending it. And if you go over time for too long, you risk getting a ticket. All that is still true. Now let's start with a clean slate and fast forward through a decade of progress and try to imagine the ideal end user parking experience 10 years from now in 2030. So you're going out to dinner. Your car knows your reservation. It shows you the best route right when you get in. It monitors traffic. The GPS takes you straight to the closest open spot on a side street next to the restaurant. You park, you eat dinner, and then you leave. And by the time you get home, there's a $12 fee charged to your account automatically. There's no circling, there's no kiosk, no app, and no ticket. You just park and leave. It's simple, it's fast, it's unnoticeable, which I think is really important. But the whole system, the whole backend still exists, it's just hidden. And it's hidden so that the end user experience feels painless. You just park and leave. But all of it still is going on the back end, and your stay is being tracked, and you were charged for the amount of time you were there. And if you didn't pay, you would have gotten a ticket. It's just not noticeable. Coming back to reality, what's stopping us from having that now? Because if you think about it, we have all that technology. We have cameras, we have digital payments, we have connected cars, everything, all of the parts we have that we need for that type of parking system. And in short, the underlying issue is things are getting more and more complicated really fast. There are more types of users and more users per user type, and just a lot more vehicles on the road. You even have like TNCs now. They are non-commercial plates, but used for commercial purposes, and that introduces a whole new set of sub-problems. And Uber isn't even the star child anymore. You got the DoorDashes and the Instacart of the world, and soon the autonomous delivery robots. We'll have an army of those kind of going around on sidewalks. And all of this really just goes to show that the demand side of city curbs is innovating and using technology to do new things a lot faster than the supply side. But it doesn't have to be that way. The whole point of technology is to solve otherwise impossible problems that you couldn't really do by hand. And instead of avoiding complexity, technology lets us use it and leverage it and master it ultimately. There's the phrase, the ultimate form of sophistication is simplicity. And I think that's a good objective to strive for and a good problem to solve for. If you think about it, and this is like a classic example, it's amazing that any of us right now can instantly access the cumulative knowledge of all humans by Googling, and you get an answer right away. Or that I can even do this presentation live, over Zoom to a bunch of people spread around the country or the world. Like, that's awesome. I had one of those moments yesterday. On Sunday, I ordered these headphones from Walmart, and I did 2-day shipping, and they were supposed to get here Wednesday. And then by the time I woke up yesterday, they were at my doorstep, which is like less than 12-hour shipping. And I have no idea how that works or what happened there that I got that, but it was really convenient. And it was the output, the end result was really simple. But I'm sure that on the back end there, whatever logistics algorithms drove Walmart to actually give me that 12-hour shipping are really, really complicated. Let's look at a parking example. So with Sarasota, we earlier this year worked on a project in Sarasota with Walker Consultants and the city of Sarasota. And we did a study on downtown parking activity. We installed 16 cameras. We put them there for a month, and they covered about 75 spaces or zones, kind of different types of spaces like alleyways and stuff. And from that, we had a total of 4 million images. And we analyzed those and generated 12 million or 13 million data points, which is like an Excel sheet that's 12 million long. And those data points represented 15,000 individual parking sessions that cumulative spanned 850,000 minutes, which is pretty crazy. Just kind of seeing all those numbers aggregated. And honestly, trust me, after 100 hours of analysis, I was very hands-on with this project. I had my doubts about technology and its ability to sort through the complexity. But eventually, in using technology and just kind of staying at it, we were able to form some simple conclusions and takeaways from all of that complexity that was inputted into it. And some examples of those takeaways or conclusions are delivery trucks were using the alleyways for deliveries appropriately, mostly during business hours, during weekdays. And TNCs and food delivery vehicles were the biggest users of no parking zones at the curbside, and they would stay for less than 10 minutes. And the most interesting part for me anyway, and for VADE, I guess, is that when you compare the findings that we got out of that with the retro form of data collection of sending somebody out there to do counts that are aggregated by the hour, a lot of that data and those takeaways disappear. If you're aggregating by the hour, you don't see those 5-minute TNCs, or you mark it as that's the entire hour. And I think we're just starting to scratch the surface of the amount of information that's out there, and that the things that we don't actually know about the activity going on at the curb, because we haven't had the tools to see it yet. And I'll leave that with Sarasota as a teaser. There's more information coming soon, so stay tuned. Let's look at another example. So TNCs, right? Let's look at how they plan on the demand side to use the curb. The Uber algorithm is complicated. It balances riders with drivers, and the end result is a simple product. And it was so valuable as a simple product that it changed the world, changed culture, changed like how we get around. And Uber is a two-sided marketplace. They actually, interestingly, at the start of Uber, to make sure they had enough of the supply side for their marketplace, they would give guarantees and even like fixed salaries to drivers, just to make sure that there wouldn't be long wait times for the riders. It's pretty interesting, but eventually it balanced out and was more self-sustaining. But with that being a two-sided marketplace, think about how complicated a three-sided marketplace would be. Unfortunately, you don't have to think that hard. That is what the sum of the systems of a three-sided marketplace like DoorDash looks like. And that is, the three sides are the users, the drivers, and then of course the actual restaurant or the merchants. And those are just some of the systems, the architecture of some of the systems going into it. It's really an incredibly complex problem, to the point where when Uber started, I think they kind of brute forced it and did algorithms, and maybe even DoorDash started more algorithm driven. But at this point, it's really all black boxes, machine learning models that make the best decisions possible, but no one really actually follows or tracks the decision granularly. And as the systems, like as you went from a 2 to 3-sided marketplace, it gets exponentially more complicated, to the point where no single person could actually understand everything that's going on. But the end product, everybody can understand very intuitively, the place order. And then somehow a hot, prepared, well-packaged meal shows up at your doorstep in 20 minutes. It's fascinating. I went down a rabbit hole with those system architectures, but that's for another time. So looking at cities again, technology alone won't drive outcomes. I like to think about it like a car. Like you can put a turbocharged V8 in a minivan, but it's not going to make it 10 times better. And even if you have a supercar, most roads still have speed limits and you still have to abide by them or you get in trouble. But when you combine new technology or powerful technology with the appropriate policy, it can be really powerful, especially when it's complementary to each other. One example would be if you're using camera technology and then you also have a policy for loading zone billing. So you're using cameras to charge for loading zones. So then fleets, they're integrated to do the payments, but suddenly since they're already integrated, you can get the telematics stuff and that data as well. And then you can use technology to take that telematics data and more efficiently and appropriately allocate curb space to the different users. And it kind of creates a flywheel where everybody's incentivized to participate more, and the more people participate, the better outcomes everybody gets. And if we take all the technology that, at least, this is obviously from the perspective of VADE and really what we've worked on. But if you take the technology that exists today, but just hasn't seen, mass mainstream adoption, the cameras, computer vision, real-time data, open API integrations and data standards, and then you add the appropriate policy on top of that, like user-based pricing, dynamic rules and allocation, and automated enforcement like citation by mail. The end result brings us to the same outcomes we strive for today, but achieving them at levels that we can't currently today. And that's stuff like providing equitable access downtown and reducing congestion and maximizing public safety and, of course, generating city revenues. The combination of tech and policy is really the key above either one individually to actually achieving outcomes reliably and repeatedly. And connecting the curb, I love that tagline. I think we came up with like 6 months ago, but it means it's more than just like getting real-time data about the curb. I mean, that's part of it, of course, but it's about the ecosystem as a whole. So cameras with computer vision, what they really do and what real-time data really does there is it gives us a ground truth, something to compare everything else against because we know this is true. And with that, we can build on top of it a larger ecosystem that connects a now digitally native curb to the rest of mobility, which is digitally native by this point and already doing its own stuff. So it just brings the curb into the equation and allows it to be an active component and participant. And the further into the back end of the connected curb we go, the more we see the true complexity behind it. So autonomous vehicles, fleets and transit and TNCs and private citizens and apps, they all can communicate with the curb and through the curb in real time. And at that point, the curb becomes more of almost a ledger of sorts. And this is a concept I think a lot about, but I haven't seen it succinctly kind of summarized. And I don't think I'm close to that yet. But as an example, imagine a FedEx truck, right? They just finished their last stop and they're going to the next loading zone. So they check if that loading zone is available, and it is. So they tell the loading zone, all right, my ETA is 7 minutes. And then an Amazon van nearby completes their previous stop and is going to go to the same loading zone. So then they check and say, hey, is that loading zone available? And they find out from the loading zone, it is available right now, but there's a different vehicle that's going to be there before I get there. So instead of what would currently happen today, where Amazon goes and then there's a FedEx truck already there, so then they either double park or circle. Instead of that, Amazon reroutes to the next available spot, and it changes how they structure their last mile routing algorithm to be more efficient because they know ahead of time whether or not they're going to run into an issue rather than being reactive to that. And the beauty with that is it boils down to just leveraging incentives. I mean, these are for-profit companies that are really, really good at being efficient, as those system architectures showed. And like fleets, they don't want to cruise for parking. They don't want to double park. They don't want to get tickets. They don't want to skip stops. But they can only do what they have an economic incentive to, or the legal incentive to. In the end, they want to be as efficient as possible. So we should look at it like our objective function is to build the tools so that they can do the heavy lifting and use those tools to maximize their own efficiency, because that's what they are incentivized to do. And this isn't a zero-sum game, and I think that's an important component of this, and honestly, a big reason why myself and I think I speak for definitely my co-founders in the VADE team, that's why we're so interested in what we're up to, and like a lot of the tough things we run into with like manufacturing and just the different obstacles along the way. All of those problems are a lot more palatable with the thought of we're improving infrastructure that benefits everybody, and it's not just we're doing something to then take something from somebody else and bring it to ourselves or win at anybody else's expense. And these are fairly straightforward cities: more public safety, revenue, less congestion, which is less emissions. The citizens get more livable streets, more convenient parking, and better access. Fleets get to be more efficient and more compliant without having a whole team dedicated to negotiating with New York's ticket discounting program. And they get more information. Everything's more transparent about the rules and the availability of the curb. And then the local businesses, they benefit from there being more access and easier access to downtown so citizens can come and shop, bringing them more turnover and more revenue. So it's a nice overall system. Of course, it's not perfect. It's not like you'd implement a system like this and nothing would ever go wrong. And there will be trade-offs, especially at the beginning, But progress isn't free. And I think, especially in this case, as we reach sort of the ceiling of the optimization of the parking system that we've been building within, we want to optimize for the long term. And right now, that really means looking at what is the infrastructure level stuff that we can be looking at, and the policies and technology that we can be implementing, that other things down the road can be built on top of in an easy and effective manner. If you're interested in learning more, I tried to collect some of the resources I kind of used to get a grasp of the past and everything that's led up to this point. It blows my mind kind of how long curb management has been a hot topic, and it really just makes me feel like we got kind of lucky with timing, that we were doing what we're doing at right now and not 8 years ago. And we stand on a lot of the shoulders of people in the industry and no longer in the industry that put a lot of effort into that. And the way I see it is, like, the present state today is we've explored a lot of the complexity of the individual components and how they fit together and what each thing does and where the moving parts line up. And we've done a good number of pilots and real world tests where we get actual data to play around with. And SF Park, that was the first thing we saw. We started like 4 years ago, and we were like, oh my God, parking solved, occupancy data, that's everything. Then the reality set in, and thus started the journey. But the results of what all this really means at a bigger picture level, they're really promising. You can see all the links on that slide at that domain, vadepark.com/curb-wiki. I actually just embedded that previous slide with all the links like on that domain. And there's also on that page there's a box to enter your email if you want to sign up for updates. We've got some very interesting things and exciting things planned, including some more details about that Sarasota project. But of course, no obligation to enter the email. You're more than welcome to just click the links and check out what's out there. There's a lot of, especially research-heavy statistical stuff about kind of the interaction between fleets and the curb. And I tend to enjoy those the most, but there's also plenty of more qualitative pieces of material out there and information. And with that, I guess I got to open the chat and see if there are any questions built up, but otherwise we can kind of open it up for discussion. Does Sarasota charge FedEx, UPS, et cetera, to park on the curb? So to my knowledge, they have not been charging. I can't get into details of the end result of that study yet. That is, that analysis is a ongoing project. But I can say that the nature behind the study in the first place was that the commercial fleets or trucks were allowed to load in the alleyways, and they're not allowed to park along the curb side of the main intersection. Those were no parking zones. And the theory was, which was proved, is that when those alleyways are taken, you started to see a lot of activity going on at the curbsides. And the kind of above and beyond information we saw is that it's not just when the alleyways are taken, but there are the shorter dwell time TNC and rideshare type of trips that those would be occurring under 10 minutes long on the curbsides in no parking zones, kind of regardless of the alleyways and their occupancy. And then they're talking now and discussing the potential paths forward and how to address some of the findings.
If anyone else has questions they'd like to ask, please type them in the chat box, and we'll be happy to get those answered for you.
And here is the link that was on that slide. It's in the chat. don't be shy. If you disagree with me or want to criticize anything there, I'm open for some discourse. That's a really good point, Raymond. And I see that as it kind of ties into the incentives of like, they don't want to double park. They don't want to, break the rules. But when the capture rate of double parking, for example, is 2%, they're going to just go ahead and do it anyway. But if you start booting their vehicles and increasing the opportunity cost of doing what you don't want to do, then you can start actually influencing behavior. And it's not in a vacuum. You can't just start giving them every ticket or booting them every single time. You also need to give them more space to park, because ultimately this is a supply constrained market and that's not going to change. But if you are giving them more space and a better means of accessing these zones so that they don't have to double park, and simultaneously, I'm still using double parking as the example, and simultaneously making it so if they don't be compliant, they'll get in trouble every time. With both of those things combined, then it's a obvious decision or almost a forced hands that they have to participate. And another area where policy and tech play well together, because with if you put out a policy that you can do citation by mail, that makes it way easier, even just for commercial vehicles. It makes it way easier to adjust the lever of what the cost is or the risk is for them. Time lost. Yeah. Thoughts on how technologies will continue to become more sustainable? It's an interesting question, Matt. Thank you for it. The angle I look at that, so when we started with wireless stuff and tech and the cameras, we made them solar and cellular, and we designed and developed and built them, not because we want to be a hardware company, that's a lot of headaches, but because nobody else was. And at the time, for a while, I kind of looked at it like it was a stepping stone. We're making a really easy on-ramp to start getting this data and building out the infrastructure and seeing how other solutions kind of build on top of it. But a few years later, where we are today, I don't know if it's just an easy on-ramp or a stepping stone anymore. I kind of think, if it would be 2 or 3 years by the time a city wanted to then transfer to, all right, let's do a big permanent installation. We're very close to the point where there's no trade-off between powered or wireless. We're already almost there, but I definitely think in 2 or 3 years, you're not really going to be sacrificing anything by having a solar cellular camera or sensor as compared to a wired power one. How many cities are you currently working with? Do you have any insight into the barriers to utilizing the technologies that VADE is offering today? So we are currently deployed in 5 locations. One of those is a state, so 4 cities in 1 state. And in terms of barriers, I would say largely that it has to do with kind of the vendor ecosystem and integration. So when we first built out our solution and we considered it like, all right, we're done, our solution, let's launch. The whole idea was just an API. We'd feed data into other vendors and existing solutions, and they can use it and automate and improve. And that was in particular kind of purely around the smart parking without so much of a focus on loading zones. But when we did that, and no shade on the vendors, they made the right decision. Why would they take a risk on an unproven startup, and bringing us into a city at that point before we had any traction behind us? So late last year in 2020, we built a dashboard, like the first version of our dashboard product, and I learned SQL to set that up, which ended up being really useful, although really painful, especially with the 15 million rows of data. But by building the dashboard, what we saw is if we start to do some of the things ourselves, then suddenly there's a lot more motivation for the ecosystem and the other vendors to integrate, and which we love. You know, if we can just provide the data and the systems are in place and ready to integrate, that benefits all parties. But I would say, in general, a big barrier is that a lot of the value prop or the end outcome of you know what you're getting out of the data depends on the quality and how comprehensive the integration is across different systems. You know, wayfinding and enforcement and the back office and analytics. It needs to touch everywhere, and as we know with parking, it's a very integrated, piecemealed system. But I think as the standards evolve, like with OMF standard coming out, I think that will all start to get a lot easier, and it'll be more just flipping a switch than you know, a big bespoke integration. Any other questions? Toss them in the chat. Duran asked, do you see future for developing curb parking geared towards incentivizing new technology vehicle sales market, like EV and autonomous, or will it stay predictive and reactionary? Developing. I think, well, in terms of like, if you put up, actually, so I drive electric, and I can't tell you the number of times that I've used like a charge point charger and a map, and it's been like, all right, it's available. And I've been on like 5 miles of charge. And then I got there and it said available because no one was plugged in, but it was just a combustion engine car in the spot. You know, that's kind of a baseline, like you can overcome that and actually tell if a charger is available or not. I think it's valuable there. I don't think it's the biggest game changer in the world, but it's a really nice value add for encouraging those, especially if they're like really good spots, like downtown or something. And of course, the trade-off has to be there that if somebody uses it inappropriately, there needs to be, I think like accessible spots are a good example of protected zones that function very well because there's both a societal and a literal financial high cost of you know, abusing them. And then with autonomous, that's an interesting concept in general. I think, you know, I'm not sold that we'll have every car on the road being self-driving by 2030. I think it'll be a bigger component. I think, you know, every car will have a little bit of it, maybe on the highways, but I'm not holding my breath for a solely autonomous, you know, downtown street and you know, city urban mobility system. But even with that scenario, when all the cars are autonomous, it's still a lot of different systems. They're still touching each other and talking to each other, and there's still a need for a central ground truth, because without a ground truth at that point, then it's, all right, do I trust all of these different vehicles to be self-reporting everything they do? Do I trust the TNCs or micromobility that, you know, they're telling me everything I need to know? I guess that, I don't even know where this trust but verify. Some president said that, I think.
Any more questions? You could just type them in the chat box. Excuse me.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Thank you for the clarification, Lyndon.
All right, Matty, did you have anything final you wanted to share?
No, that would wrap it up. Anybody, if you want to reach me, I'll put my email in the chat, even if it's just to talk. I am very curious to learn more about how things differ from city to city, and I think that is a big challenge of curb management in the future in general. Is there's an amount of customization that needs to occur on a city to city basis, but there's also, you know, most of the problems at their root are very similar in nature. So the more exposure and the more we can all, and the more I can learn about kind of the nuanced differences from one place to another, I think that'll be really helpful for designing and developing the future products and solutions we're working on.
Great.
All right. Well, thank you
Thanks for
everyone
being
for
with us.
joining.